this year. People have complained they came before Columbus is very expensive. It now sells for $19.95. They can't afford it. But I'm now doing the paperback edition, so everybody will be able to afford it. There are the books of other very fine people here. There's the works of Dr. Ben. There are fine things done by Runoko Rashidi. There are a whole lot of people here who've done very remarkable things. Dr. Finch, who will be here tomorrow, and quite a number of other people. I'm only mentioning one or two because I can't think of all the names of the people at this conference. But I want you to become aware that these things are being created. But none of these gentlemen could just jump up in the air and throw his books across the states and their praises will all come fluttering down. We have to realize we have a serious responsibility. It's a common responsibility. This is a crusade. Okay, go ahead. I don't know anything about it. This is a query about some pyramid that was unveiled in Rome yesterday, but I know nothing about it. Yeah. Oh, yes. I just want you to be aware of one of the two people I just mentioned, Runoko Rashidi, who is co-editor with me. In fact, he's the true editor. This is a field that I know very little about. African presence in early Asia. Please give a hand to Runoko Rashidi. Would you stand up? In fact, he will give you the definitive talk on Ramesses II tomorrow. Okay. Very interesting question. Why did the Egyptians paint themselves red, and why did they separate themselves from other people? Now, red ochre, and this is what I find so strange, because all anthropologists should know that red ochre was used for thousands of years by Africans as a ritual thing that they put on their skin. It was a symbol of vitality. It had nothing to do with skin color. They dusted this red ochre. Therefore, you find paintings of Africans at times with very clearly African features, but with reddish skin. That is not necessarily the skin of the person. You find the use of yellow in the same way for women. The Egyptians, like most nations, reach a point where they make a certain national identification and separate themselves. The French separate themselves from the Germans separate themselves from the English separate themselves from the Russians. They don't just say, we're all white people. Okay, so the fact that they separate themselves as a nation doesn't become a ground for people saying that shows that they were not real Negroes or black people. Okay, well, I want to make that quite clear. We don't do that by saying it's very clear since the French separate themselves as a nation that they're not Europeans.
Yes, could you briefly comment on what you think some of the implications of the lack of the kind of knowledge that you have brought forth and Diop brought forth, what some of those the implications of those are today for Africans in the worldwide diaspora, but particularly in here in the belly of the beast?
Yes. What are the implications? And I think that was very clear. What are the implications of all this? First of all, let me speak from my own experience. I have suffered tremendously in my early life because I grew up with a terrible inferiority complex. I felt that I was inferior. I really believed that because every evidence that was presented to me, all the books I read, all the things I saw in the world, made it absolutely clear to me that I belonged in inferior race. There was not a single book on Africa in my library except Tarzan. There was not a single film I ever saw in Africa where the African wasn't some kind of semi-savage. There was not a single thing ever said about the African except that he was physically strong. How could I possibly therefore believe that he had civilization when I never saw any book showing that civilization? Now comes the question, what kind of thing did that do to me? It could have killed me. At the age of 32, I decided to take my life. I could easily have been snuffed out. The knowledge that came with the realization that shattered though our people were, scattered and dispersed across the diaspora, that we could recover enough that could give us a sense of wholeness so that our psyche could be healed, so that we no longer had to feel this self-hatred and self-contempt, so that we no longer wanted to do as one of our novelists from Guyana did. He, growing up like me, in spite of his achievements, so desperately wanted to rid himself of himself that he took gasoline and lit a match and burned his skin off. Naturally, he died. This is the kind of horror we lived with. We did not want to be black because black was associated with everything that was inferior. So do not for one moment think, as some people here think, that we in the Caribbean or out in Africa suffer any less anguish in terms of racism. We desperately needed to know so that we could feel again like real human beings. And the energy that was generated by those discoveries was so extraordinary that it is as if our circuits were charged all over again, as if we actually started to live again. It's as if we had come out of the grave after the crucifixion of racism, that we had come out of the grave and started to walk in the world again. So, if you want to know what are the implications, those are the implications, that we are made whole by this reconstruction, that those shattered pieces are pulled together again so that we can be healed by this. And those people who have oppressed us and still in various ways do still oppress us may have a different conception of the world, a different vision of themselves in history, a different vision of us in history, so they too may not have the blinders, may not have the same kind of contempt, the same kind of hatred of us, so that by their being liberated as we are liberated, they may liberate us. Now I would like to show you some slides very quickly. It is very important that you should see some of these things. So if you would cut the lights, we can begin. This is a figure, a sculpture that was found in early Europe. And one of the things that they have discovered is that many of the sculptures of early Europe show various African types. In fact, 55,000 years ago, according to 3 labs, the University of Oxford, University of Hawaii, the University of California at Berkeley have come to the conclusion that there are no people on the earth 55,000 years ago who are not black Africans. Then you have a number of Africans who are caught in the ice. Some people put it around southwestern Russia, some put it around Spain, but they're caught in the ice. And this type, which Diop and others call the Grimaldi type, undergoes a mutation over the next 10,000 years. The dropping of pigmentation, because in the ice, in the twilight of Europe at that time, where there's not enough sun that can come through the pigmentation shield which is necessary to deal